You were never supposed to hear this. In 1848, 47 journals were discovered under a chapel floorboard, each one belonging to a missing girl. Each name erased from public memory. Each truth buried by a government signature. But the story didn't begin there. It began in Salem, 1811, under the mask of Christian charity, cloaked in Protestant virtue, and soaked in blood. Section 1. America wears a clean face. It smiles in museums, lectures in classrooms, and preaches at pulpits. But beneath its powdered skin, there is rot. Institutional rot. Familial rot. A centuries-old infection dressed as tradition. And no name better represents this than the Fairfax family. To the history books, they were visionaries, educators, moral stewards of a struggling Salem. But if you trace the bloodlines, if you follow the old stone corridors and dig under the academy walls, you'll find something else. Something older than their wealth, older than America itself. A ritual practiced in secrecy, perfected in shadows. This isn't just the story of a corrupt institution. This is about a system, a blueprint of control. The Fairfax Academy wasn't a school. It was a prototype, a training ground not for learning, but for submission. And the girls they claimed to save, they were the offering. Victoria Fairfax, hailed as a pillar of virtue, descended on Salem in 1811 with widow's silk and missionary eyes. The town, still shaking off the stains of its witch-hunting past, welcomed her as a savior. But they didn't ask the right questions. They didn't ask why a Virginia heiress came north. They didn't ask what really happened to her late husband. And they never once asked why the Academy's doors stayed open long after the candles went out. You'll want to turn away. You'll want to believe this is fiction. But I promise you it's not. Every whisper in this story is rooted in record, in confession, and in testimonies sealed for public safety. What you're about to hear has been smuggled from archives. Every element of the Academy was deliberate. The stained glass windows in the chapel didn't just depict saints. They portrayed martyrs. Women burned, buried, hanged. The messages were clear to those who looked long enough. Suffering was holy. Obedience was godliness. And silence was survival. But what you must understand is this: Victoria Fairfax wasn't just a widow with a dream. She was part of something older than the colonies. A bloodline steeped in occult Protestant mysticism, passed through the Southern aristocracy. A network of secret initiates, hidden beneath titles like philanthropist, educator, and reformer. And her academy? It was a front, a farm for human innocence. Records from the era speak of her speeches, how she spoke of purifying the feminine vessel, disciplining chaos, and breaking the child to build the saint. To the public, she was poetic. To those inside, she was a warden. The first class consisted of 23 girls. 10 of them were orphans, no family to report bruises or question disappearances. The rest came from families too poor to pull them out. They were selected for a single trait: vulnerability. And once admitted, they entered a different world. One where sleep was a privilege, where meals were withheld as punishment, where sins were invented to justify correction, and where special instruction became a euphemism for rituals no child should ever endure. Salem's elite praised the Academy as a model of Christian charity. But they never saw the bruises. They never heard the screams after sundown. They never stood outside the chapel late at night, when candlelight twisted across the windows like flame through stained glass, and a girl's voice cried out behind stone walls. And still, the records remained silent, sealed, sanitized, because the Fairfax Academy was not an anomaly. It was a template. Section 3. The Chapel Rituals. A Sacrament of Shadows. The chapel sat at the center of the Academy grounds, stone-walled, ivy-wrapped, and unervingly cold, even in summer. It was Victoria's pride. She called it the sanctum, but the girls called it something else. The room where God doesn't look. They were made to enter barefoot, always at night, always in silence. If a girl spoke, she was punished. If she cried, the punishment was doubled. And every Friday, one of them was chosen. They called it the drawing of the lot. No one knew how the names were selected. There was no paper, no bowl. Just Victoria's voice from the pulpit, naming a girl in front of the others. Calmly, without emotion, as if she were reading a recipe. Margaret, you will stay after. Eloise, remain behind. Ruth, take off your shoes. What happened next was spoken of only in broken whispers. Binding rituals. Strange hymns not found in any hymnal. Etchings on the floor that glowed faintly when the lanterns were dimmed. One survivor would later testify, anonymously, from a sanitarium in Maine, that the chapel smelled of iron and lavender, and that Victoria's hands were always warm, even in the dead of winter. The girls were not taught scripture in the chapel. They were taught submission, not to God but to Victoria, to the order, and to something older than both. In the records, those rare, redacted fragments that escaped destruction, there is mention of the sacrificial purification of the will, a phrase that repeats across journals, ledgers, and psychiatric reports tied to Fairfax-run institutions. It was their dogma, the breaking of the self to allow in the divine authority. But what was this authority? One journal, believed to belong to a girl named Clara Ellings, contained drawings, crude sketches of a figure, tall, robed, no face, always watching. She called it the man from the third floor. When the academy closed in 1879 after a sudden fire destroyed the West Wing, no formal investigation followed. Victoria Fairfax was already dead, buried in a marble crypt beneath the chapel floor. But no one was allowed to examine the body. The casket was sealed, and records of the academy's final days were lost in a courthouse flood the very next month. But survivors lived, and their descendants remember, because what happened inside those chapel walls didn't end with Victoria. It passed on, through blood, through names, through institutions that still collect the vulnerable under the banner of service. And still, beneath the steeples, beneath the crosses, those rituals continue. Because the chapel may have burned, but the order never did. Section 4. The Fairfax Bloodline. A Covenant of Silence. Before Victoria Fairfax was a name whispered in terror, the family name carried a different kind of weight. Landowners, judges, pastors, they came over from England with the earliest Puritan fleets, bearing not just Bibles, but books. Old books, ones not found in any church. Their lineage traces back to Thomas Fairfax, a British noble linked to the Rosicrucians and rumored to have been expelled from the Anglican Church for heretical beliefs. He wrote of sacred dominion and heavenly governance through the obedience of lesser vessels. Centuries later, those beliefs would be reborn in Massachusetts, not in a palace, but in a school for girls. Victoria was his great-great-granddaughter, but unlike the men who came before her, she didn't mask the family's spiritual agenda with Latin or law. She wrapped it in charity, in mercy, in the image of the holy matron. But beneath that veil was a woman meticulously trained from childhood to continue a covenant of silence and suffering. She was never seen in public without gloves. Not once, even in summer. It was said she bore markings, burned into her palms in childhood. A rite of passage, a covenant seal, the Fairfax seal. Her brother, Josiah Fairfax, was less visible, but far more dangerous. A physician, a philanthropist, and the architect of the Academy's medical wing, which he personally oversaw. The records of his therapeutic practices are gone, purged, but a leaked death register from 1871 lists 4 girls under his care who succumbed to hysteria-related complications. They were all under the age of 13. The Fairfax family motto, etched into their original estate gate in Virginia, read, Custodiet silentium, per sanguinem, guard the silence, through blood. But what were they guarding? Clara Ellings, the same girl who sketched the man from the third floor, wrote one final sentence before disappearing in 1877. It was scratched into the wood beneath her bed frame. The Fairfax don't serve God. They keep him locked away. Was it metaphor, madness, or a truth too horrifying to be uttered aloud? Today, descendants of the Fairfax name walk among us. Rebranded, respected, their surnames changed through marriage, their positions cloaked in politics, philanthropy, and education. But the covenant remains, and those who try to expose it tend not to last. Because this was never about one family. It's about what they were protecting and what they were feeding. Section 5. The West Wing Fire. Erased in smoke, preserved in fear. On the night of September 13, 1879, the Fairfax Academy for Girls ignited like a matchstick. Witnesses, few and frightened, described flames erupting not from the hearth or kitchens, but from the chapel's western door, as if something inside had finally clawed its way out. The fire devoured the West Wing in under 2 hours. The dormitory, the infirmary, and the sealed archives. The official death toll? 12 girls, 1 nun, 3 servants. But survivors, scattered and silenced, say the number was closer to 47. No fire wagons arrived. No alarms sounded. And no one questioned why the Fairfax family crypt remained completely untouched. The state investigation was swift and suspiciously shallow. Within a week, a judge declared it an unfortunate electrical mishap. A convenient lie, given the fact that no electrical wiring had ever been installed in the building. But the girls knew the truth. One survivor, Eliza Marin, later institutionalized for catatonia, spoke only once before her death in 1903. In a recorded session, she whispered, "It wasn't fire. It was him. He woke up." Authorities dismissed it as delusion. But in a strange twist, her coroner died 3 days after signing her death certificate of what the papers called acute internal bleeding of undetermined origin. No autopsy followed. Local newspapers, once eager to celebrate the Fairfax name, began avoiding mention of the academy entirely. Obituaries became vague. Land deeds were quietly altered, and the official blueprints of the school's West Wing disappeared. But the strangest twist? Victoria Fairfax's body was missing. When the crypt was opened decades later by historical preservationists, the marble lid was found cracked from the inside. The coffin, pried open, empty. No bones, no cloth, just one item left behind. A rosary, made of teeth, all child-sized. It was never shown to the public. The lead archaeologist resigned the following day. His final words to the press were chilling. "We thought we were exhuming a woman, but we unearthed a warning." The West Wing fire was no accident. It was a purge, a ritual cleansing to protect the covenant. And whatever Victoria Fairfax had unleashed in life may have survived in death. Section 6. The man from the 3rd floor. A phantom or a prisoner. Every building has its forbidden floor. In Fairfax Academy, it was the 3rd. It was never shown to visitors. Not marked on any map. And during daily routines, the nuns would lead the girls in prayer facing away from the 3rd floor stairwell, as if acknowledging it meant inviting something in. But the girls spoke of it often. In whispers. In nightmares. In drawings no child should be able to conceive. They all called him the same thing. The man from the 3rd floor. Descriptions varied, but one detail remained constant. He had no eyes. Just smooth, unbroken skin where sockets should have been. Some girls claimed he floated. Others said he stood perfectly still until you blinked. One insisted he was always humming. A low, slow tune that made your teeth hurt. In 1880, nearly a year after the fire, an orphaned girl named Lena Rowe was admitted to the reopened academy. She had no family and had reportedly lived on the streets. The church took her in, claiming salvific mercy. 3 weeks later, she was gone. Not transferred. Not adopted. Gone. What remains is her final diary entry, preserved in a box donated anonymously to the Massachusetts Historical Society. Sister Agnes says not to look at the 3rd floor window. But I saw him, and I think he saw me back, even without eyes. The page was smeared with what analysts later confirmed to be bone dust, too fine to come from an animal, and laced with trace amounts of lithium. But who, or what was this man? Some researchers believe he was Elias Fairfax, a distant uncle locked away for heretical experimentation. Others suggest he was not a man at all, but a manifestation, the result of spiritual corruption, generational ritual, and years of psychic trauma inflicted upon the girls. One whispered theory is even darker, that there was no man on the 3rd floor, only a mirror, and that what the girls saw was a reflection of what they'd become, a soulless image etched by decades of ritual abuse, psychological manipulation, and occult ceremony. The third floor has since been sealed with concrete. No key, no door, no light. But construction crews hired in 1998 to restore the property reported something chilling. Their tools went dead when near the third floor, and they all complained of the same dream. A man, in shadow, humming a song they didn't know, but couldn't forget. And on the third night of construction, a message was found scrawled across the stairwell wall, written in reverse, as if seen in a mirror. Still here. Section 7. The Veiled Room, where the mothers went to die. In the east annex of the Fairfax estate, behind a rotting door lined with rusted nails, there was a room known only by a few as the Veiled Room. It didn't appear on floor plans. The clergy denied its existence. And yet, local midwives whispered of it for years, always in relation to one chilling phrase: where the mothers went to die. The Fairfax family had always taken in unwed girls in trouble. Publicly, this was framed as a noble act of mercy. But records from a defunct medical outpost nearby told another story. Entries written in Latin, filled with terms like experimentum spiritus and sacrificium partus, spiritual experiment and sacrifice of the birth. Women who entered pregnant were rarely seen again. No children were registered, no adoptions filed, and no grave markers ever bore their names. Only one survivor ever spoke out: Marilla Dent, a nurse who escaped in 1891 and fled to Quebec under an alias. Before her death in 1933, she sent a sealed letter to a distant cousin describing what she witnessed. They covered the floor with salt and horsehair. The beds had no blankets, just leather restraints. And the births were not for life. They were offerings. According to Marilla, certain children were taken below immediately after birth. The rest, especially those born with deformities or unusual features, were burned. Their ashes used in consecration rites tied to Victoria Fairfax's posthumous theology. The room was lit entirely by candles. The walls were lined with hollow-eyed statues of Mary, each missing their right hand. Behind them, vents released a constant flow of incense, laced with chloroform and scopolamine, drugs used not to kill, but to erase memory. When the Fairfax estate was briefly seized in 1948 under suspicion of financial fraud, inspectors stumbled upon the room. What they found was beyond disturbing. Dozens of bone fragments, all female, all from individuals aged 13 to 25. The floorboards were soaked in what appeared to be decades of dried blood and embryonic fluid. And scrawled in charcoal along the ceiling were these words: blood births light, light blinds truth. Only in darkness can the womb open again. The room was quickly sealed. The evidence mysteriously lost in a courthouse fire a year later. But one file survived. A single photograph of the altar. At its center, a crucifix. But instead of Jesus, it bore the body of a pregnant woman, bound in iron, her face disfigured, and beneath it, carved into the stone: Victoria lives in every womb that breaks open in silence. To this day, no official has reopened the case, because to question the Veiled Room is to question what lies beneath every so-called sanctuary. Section 8. The Victoria Codex. Scriptures never meant for the living. In 1879, following the suspicious death of Bishop Alaric Whitmore, the same man who funded Fairfax Academy's expansion, an unmarked chest was recovered from the chapel crypt. It contained only one item: a book, bound in human leather, sealed with an iron clasp carved in Latin. Ne aperias nisi vocatus est. Do not open unless called. This book would later be known as the Victoria Codex, a forbidden manuscript believed to be penned by Victoria Fairfax herself, decades after her documented death. Linguists were baffled. The text wasn't in Latin, Greek, or Hebrew, but in a hybrid cipher made up of 19th-century shorthand, medieval French, and Enochian script, the so-called language of angels, reportedly dictated to John Dee during occult sessions in the 1500s. Decades passed before anyone dared to decode it. When they did, what they found was not scripture, but a blueprint for spiritual conquest. The Codex outlines a theology where God is not light, but a shadow behind light, where purity is found not in innocence, but in surviving corruption. It spoke of the seed of the divine wound, a metaphysical theory that pain, especially ritualized pain, can open a soul to revelation. And it wasn't metaphor. Pages described precise ceremonies, how to prepare the body, the chants to be spoken in reverse, and the substances to be consumed, including mixtures of belladonna, mercury, and breast milk from a mourning mother. The most terrifying portion? A section titled, The 13th Sacrament. Unlike baptism, communion, or confirmation, the 13th sacrament was performed in complete isolation. It involved a fasting period of 33 days, silence, and the recitation of a phrase into a mirror blackened with blood. Victoria, open me. Victoria, break me. Victoria, live in me. Survivors of the ritual reported violent seizures, followed by hallucinations of a woman with no face, beckoning them to the other room. 3 priests who read the codex were later institutionalized. One gouged out his eyes, claiming, "She showed me the womb of God. It's not a place. It's a hunger." The Vatican officially declared the text a blasphemous forgery and ordered all copies destroyed. But whispers claim that one intact version remains, hidden in a lead box, buried beneath the foundation of the Fairfax Chapel. Buried alive with something else, because the final line of the codex reads, "Whoever opens this book opens her, and she is waiting." Section 9. The Disappeared, the Fairfax Orphan Program, and the vanishing of 187 children. From 1882 to 1906, the Fairfax estate proudly operated the St. Aurelius Orphan Initiative, a faith-based program supposedly created to provide shelter, education, and Christian discipline to abandoned or morally endangered children across Appalachia. Local newspapers celebrated the initiative. Donations poured in from churches across Virginia and North Carolina. The children, mostly between ages 4 and 12, arrived by train, escorted by nuns in thick black veils who never gave their names. But here's the part no one talks about. 187 children were admitted. Only 23 were ever officially adopted. And not a single burial record exists for the rest. They didn't age out. They didn't run away. They simply vanished. The truth began to surface in 1911, when Pastor Gideon Hurst, a former insider turned whistleblower, released a series of handwritten journals titled The Bone-Bound Boys. He claimed the orphanage was a front, a supply line for ritualistic research conducted deep beneath the Fairfax Chapel. According to Hurst, the children were subjected to sleep deprivation tests, sensory annihilation chambers, language erasure through electric shock, and most chillingly, a program called soul listening, where children were made to lie in sealed stone vaults for hours while priests dictated verses from the Victoria Codex. Hurst described these children as offerings for illumination, their innocence treated as a currency, their suffering as a sacrament. One journal page read, "They made the girls swallow candles, and the boys wear crowns of broken glass. If they cried, they were called weak. If they didn't, they were taken below." In 1935, during renovation work after a flood, construction crews unearthed a sealed limestone corridor beneath the east wall of the Fairfax Chapel. Inside, they found a row of 23 child-sized chairs, all facing a blood-stained altar, a rusted phonograph endlessly looping the same Latin hymn, and a floor covered in tiny teeth. Authorities quickly declared the area a forgotten crypt. No investigation was launched. No DNA tests performed. No charges filed. To this day, the fate of the remaining 164 children is unaccounted for. But a stained glass panel still remains in the upper spire of the Fairfax Chapel. It shows a faceless child holding hands with a dark-robed woman, surrounded by flames, and etched beneath it in curling gold script, "In sacrifice, the child becomes the key." Section 10. The Crimson Bell, a ritual that still echoes. In 1902, a sound began to haunt the hills of Whitmore Valley. It came at night, always at 3:13 a.m., always from the Fairfax Chapel bell tower, which, according to town records, had no working bell. Locals called it the Crimson Bell. A low, guttural toll, not metallic, but almost organic, like a voice groaning through hollow bone. Over time, Patterns emerged. Every night the bell rang, a local animal was found mutilated by dawn. No blood, no tracks, no explanation. Just the carcass, eyes burned black, tongue removed, and spine twisted into a spiral. By 1905, the phenomenon escalated. It wasn't just animals anymore. 6 townspeople disappeared. One elderly woman was found nailed upside down to her barn door, mouth stuffed with Fairfax sheets. No one could prove anything. But then came Elijah Monroe, a deaf gravedigger who worked the chapel grounds. He couldn't hear the bell, but said he could feel it. Said it pressed on the inside of his teeth like a second heartbeat. And then he made a horrifying discovery. Deep in the chapel's basement, behind a false wall, he found a velvet-lined chamber. In the center, a pulsing organic bell grown, not built, twisting with veins, stitched skin, and bone. Embedded in its side, human teeth. Monroe fled. Days later, he was found dead in the woods, his body arranged in the fetal position, surrounded by a perfect circle of dried blood. No footprints leading in, none leaving. A letter was found in his coat. It's not a bell, it's her mouth. And when it tolls, she remembers. To this day, amateur paranormal groups still hike to the ruins of the Fairfax Chapel. Some report hearing whispers. Others claim to have witnessed the bell's invisible toll, felt it shake in their bones. But the most chilling account came in 1997, when 3 teenagers dared each other to sleep inside the ruins. Only one made it out. He was found wandering the road at dawn, naked, incoherent, and covered in bite marks shaped like children's teeth. When questioned, he repeated just one sentence. The bell was laughing. Section 11. The Silent Choir. Voices lost to darkness. Deep within the Fairfax estate's private archives, there exists a collection of phonograph recordings, fragile cylinders, barely playable, sealed away for over a century. These recordings were rediscovered in 2003 during a renovation of the Fairfax mansion, hidden behind a false panel in the library wall. What they captured was far from ordinary. The sounds begin with faint, dissonant humming, escalating into a cacophony of voices, mostly girls, singing hymns in distorted harmonies that seem both human and inhuman. The choir never sings in unison, but in eerie counterpoints, layering tones that seem to penetrate the soul rather than soothe it. Scholars who analyzed these recordings found something even more disturbing. Embedded within the layers of song were coded frequencies, ultrasounds imperceptible to the naked ear but known to influence the brain's limbic system. It appears these songs were deliberately crafted not for worship, but for psychological manipulation, designed to induce trance states, obedience, and dissociation. According to survivors' whispered accounts collected from local descendants, the choir was made up of girls selected for their spiritual receptivity, taken from the academy and subjected to daily sessions in the basement chapel. Here, they were forced to sing while enduring sensory deprivation, isolation, and ritualistic punishments. One survivor's note, scrawled in faded ink on a torn page of a diary, reads, "We were the silent choir, forced to raise our voices, but never our eyes, singing prayers that burned our throats, while shadows whispered, secrets only we could hear." The Fairfax family's control extended beyond the physical realm into the very minds of these girls, weaponizing sound, faith, and fear as tools of dominion. The implication is clear. This was not simply a religious institution, but a laboratory of human control, where innocence was fractured and reshaped to serve darker, hidden agendas. And the chilling question remains: how many of those voices still echo in the walls? And how many continue to sing in silence, bound by forces no one dares to name? Section 12. The Fairfax Codex. Secrets written in blood. Buried in the Fairfax estate's private collection is a document so dark, so cryptic, it has become a legend among occult scholars and conspiracy researchers alike. The Fairfax Codex. This manuscript, handwritten on vellum stained with what forensic experts later confirmed to be human blood, spans over 200 pages of tangled script and disturbing illustrations. The Codex doesn't read like a typical book. It's a mixture of esoteric rites, philosophical doctrines, sinister diagrams depicting human anatomy overlaid with occult symbols. What stands out is its obsession with the concept of the sacrifice of innocence as the gateway to power. Repeated throughout its pages are instructions for ceremonies involving binding children in ritual circles, chanting in forgotten tongues, the invocation of shadowy entities referred to only as the custodians. The codex implies that the Fairfax family didn't merely seek earthly power. They believed they could harvest spiritual energy from their victims, converting pure innocence into a force capable of bending reality. Local folklore insists the codex was written by Victoria Fairfax herself, following her studies in Europe where she reportedly encountered underground secret societies. One particularly haunting illustration depicts a child with a heart exposed bleeding into an ancient sigil. The caption reads, "The key to dominion lies in the willing heart broken and remade." When scholars attempted to translate the codex fully, several were met with mysterious accidents. One linguist disappeared without a trace. Another suffered a mental breakdown after months of study. A third was found dead in his study, eyes wide in terror, clutching the last page of the manuscript. Despite the risks, fragments of the codex have been cross-referenced with historical events. The deaths at St. Aurelius Orphan Initiative, the Silent Choir, and the Crimson Bell all find echoes in its twisted pages. The Fairfax Codex isn't just a book. It's a blueprint for a hidden system of control that reached deep into the fabric of American history. And it's said that those who unlock its full meaning never return the same. Section 13. The Forgotten Pact, Bloodlines and Betrayal. The Fairfax family's sinister influence was not confined to Salem or even Massachusetts. It stretched its roots deep into the corridors of power across America's emerging elite. Behind the polished facades and whispered public philanthropy lay a network of secret alliances sealed in blood. A pact forged centuries ago with shadowy forces promising prosperity and dominion in exchange for loyalty and sacrifice. This pact was never spoken aloud. It lived in clandestine meetings held in candlelit chambers, where members of the Fairfax bloodline swore allegiance not only to one another, but to an unseen hierarchy operating beyond government or church. Evidence points to the Fairfaxes' intermarriage with other powerful families, wealthy industrialists, politicians, clergy, binding their fates together in a web of corruption and influence that persists to this day. The true nature of this alliance was revealed through a cache of letters discovered in 1974 in an abandoned Fairfax estate outside Washington, D.C. One letter, written by Bartholomew Fairfax himself, described the pact with chilling clarity. "Our legacy is sustained not through virtue but through the submission of the weak. Through their innocence, we find strength. Through their silence, we command." But the pact came with a price. Blood debts had to be paid. Rituals required the continued offering of those deemed expendable. Children born into poverty, orphans, those who could not defend themselves. As the 20th century unfolded, these sacrifices became more insidious, cloaked beneath layers of institutional control. Orphanages, boarding schools, and religious institutions where young lives were consumed in silence. The Fairfax bloodline, once feared for overt brutality, mastered the art of psychological manipulation, installing systems that ensured obedience without visible violence. And still, whispers persist among those who claim to have seen beyond the veil. Whispers that the pact's power stretches beyond the physical world, influencing elections, wars, and the very culture of a nation built on secrets. The Fairfax legacy is not merely one of evil deeds but of a dark system that molds the very foundation of American power. A system designed to keep the masses obedient and the elite untouchable. Section 14. The Veil of Silence. Institutional Complicity. The Fairfax family's sinister reach was not confined to secret rituals or hidden blood pacts. It found its greatest power in the silence of institutions sworn to protect us. Hospitals, schools, churches, all became masks, shields behind which unspeakable atrocities were hidden. Take, for example, the St. Aurelius Orphan Initiative, established in 1923 under the guise of charitable care. This institution accepted children orphaned by poverty and war, promising shelter and education. But beneath its polished veneer lurked a machine designed to erase identity and crush resistance. Survivor testimonies, smuggled out decades later, reveal a system of systematic psychological control. Daily indoctrination sessions, isolation tactics that bred dependency, physical and emotional punishments for the smallest acts of defiance. The Fairfax family, through proxies, held undisputed influence over the institution's leadership, ensuring complete obedience. Why? Because this was a breeding ground, a place to cultivate a generation stripped of autonomy, primed to serve the elite's hidden agendas. Similar patterns emerge in the records of countless other institutions. The psychological control systems developed within these walls mirror techniques studied in secret military programs. The goal was clear: to produce not just compliance, but total submission of will. And those who tried to expose the truth were silenced, discredited, disappeared, or worse. What you're learning now is not merely history, it's an ongoing war for the mind, waged in shadows. The Fairfax family's legacy is built on the corpses of silenced souls and the broken spirits hidden behind institutional facades. But the silence is cracking. It is up to you to listen. Now, pause here. If you feel the weight of these truths and are ready to step beyond the veil, comment "The Crimson Bell tolls" twice below. This simple act binds you to the knowledge, marks your awareness, and awakens the part of you ready to see what others refuse to. Section 15. The Crimson Bell, a signal through time. The Crimson Bell is no mere metaphor. It was an actual bell, forged in secret by the Fairfax family in the late 18th century, hidden deep beneath the floors of their Salem estate. Its chime was never meant for celebration or solemn church service. It was a signal, a call to darkness. Records unearthed by independent historians reveal that the bell rang only on certain nights, under specific celestial alignments. When tolled, it marked the beginning of covert gatherings, rituals where the elite would convene, bound by the ancient pact. The sound of the Crimson Bell became a symbol of power, fear, and submission. Those who heard it knew that the night belonged to forces far older than America itself. Its chime echoed through Salem streets, drowning out the cries of innocence with a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying. Over the centuries, the bell's legend morphed into folklore, dismissed as myth or superstition. But recent evidence suggests that the tradition continued, evolving into coded signals in modern institutions. A knock on the door, a particular phrase whispered in halls, a sound frequency in music. These are the new tolls of the Crimson Bell, signaling allegiance, warning dissenters, and activating psychological control networks. This knowledge is dangerous. To understand the Crimson Bell is to understand how fear and control are woven into the very fabric of society. It is a reminder that history is not only written by the victors, it is orchestrated by those who command the unseen strings. This is your call to awaken, to refuse compliance, to seek the truth beneath the lies. You are now part of a lineage of seekers, those who hear the bell and choose to listen, not in submission, but in defiance. Shall I continue with Section 16? Section 16. Echoes of the past, psychological control, and the modern world. The dark legacy of the Fairfax family did not end with whispered rituals or hidden chambers. It evolved, adapting to the changing landscape of power and control. Today, the psychological systems once developed in secret academies and orphanages have become woven into the very fabric of modern society. Governments, corporations, and media outlets, unseen but omnipresent, employ subtle manipulation techniques that echo the oppressive tactics first documented at St. Mary's Academy. From carefully crafted propaganda to mass surveillance, from social conditioning to engineered distractions, the objective remains unchanged: to suppress independent thought, to fragment unity, to maintain control. You might think you are free, making your own choices, but ask yourself, how much of your reality is shaped by invisible forces operating in the shadows? These forces feed on fear, division, and complacency, wielding psychological triggers that keep millions locked in cycles of obedience and distraction. The Fairfax legacy is not just a family secret. It's a blueprint for institutional manipulation on a grand scale. This knowledge is a double-edged sword. It empowers you but also burdens you. To awaken is to become a threat to the established order. But in awakening, you gain the power to reclaim your mind, to pierce the veil of illusion, and to begin the journey toward true mastery. Remember, this is no longer just a story from the past. It is the blueprint of the world you live in today. Section 17. Breaking the chains, the path to self-mastery. Understanding the Fairfax family's dark legacy and the vast systems of control is only the beginning. True power lies not in knowledge alone, but in the conscious choice to break free. You are not a pawn, though you may have been treated as one. The chains that bind your mind, your spirit, and your will are forged by fear, ignorance, and obedience. But these chains are not unbreakable. The first step is awareness, an unflinching look into the darkness without turning away. From here, discipline becomes your weapon. Discipline to question everything, to seek truth beyond comfortable lies, and to master your own thoughts and emotions. This path is lonely and difficult. You will face resistance, not just from external forces, but from within. Your own doubts, fears, and conditioned habits will try to pull you back into submission. But the men who choose to walk this path become architects of their own destiny. They cultivate mental resilience, sharpen their focus, and build the emotional fortitude to resist manipulation. The Fairfax family's power comes from breaking others down. Your power will come from building yourself up. You are now awake. The world you see is a construct, layered in shadows and deceit. Your mission is to navigate this labyrinth, uncover hidden truths, and reclaim sovereignty over your own mind. This is the journey of true self-mastery. Are you ready to go deeper? Section 18. The Hidden Architects. Who pulls the strings today? As you peel back the layers of history, you realize the Fairfax family is not an isolated anomaly. They are part of a broader, more insidious network. A shadow elite that controls wealth, politics, media, and even the very ideas that shape society. These hidden architects operate behind closed doors, their influence spanning continents and generations. They manipulate economic systems to generate dependency, weaponize information to divide populations, and engineer crises to justify expanding control. Think of it as a chessboard, and you are being moved without your knowledge. This elite thrives on maintaining illusions. The illusion of choice, freedom, and democracy. But their real power lies in controlling the narrative, deciding what truths are told, and which are buried forever. Institutions you trust, banks, schools, governments, often serve as tools for this manipulation rather than protectors of your interests. Recognizing this network's existence is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it reveals how deeply the rot runs. Liberating because knowledge is the first step toward dismantling their control. This is why the Fairfax story matters. It's a microcosm of a much larger system designed to keep you disempowered. But every system, no matter how entrenched, has weaknesses. Your awareness is a crack in their foundation. Your refusal to comply is a threat they cannot ignore. Now more than ever, your vigilance and clarity are your greatest weapons. Section 19. The Final Curtain. The Cost of Truth and the Burden of Knowledge. The truth you've uncovered is a double-edged sword. Once seen, it can never be unseen. With every secret revealed, a new weight settles on your shoulders. You are now a keeper of dangerous knowledge, a man who has glimpsed the machinery of deception and manipulation running beneath the surface of society. This burden is heavy. It isolates, alienates, and forces difficult choices. Will you remain silent to preserve comfort and avoid conflict? Or will you stand, speak, and act, knowing the risks that come with awakening? The Fairfax family's story warns us that institutions protect their secrets with ruthless efficiency. Whistleblowers disappear, truth-tellers are discredited, and the machinery of power grinds on, indifferent to the individual. But the greatest act of rebellion is to reclaim your sovereignty, to refuse to be complicit in the lies. It begins with personal mastery, but it cannot end there. True transformation ripples outward, shaking foundations and inspiring others to question, resist, and rise. You have been chosen, not by fate, but by your willingness to look into the abyss. The road ahead is dark and fraught, but it leads to a place few ever reach: true freedom. Remember, the greatest chains are those forged in ignorance and fear. Break them, and the world shifts beneath your feet. This is your moment, your choice, your legacy. Are you ready to step fully into the truth? Section 20. Awakening the Legacy. Becoming the guardian of truth. Now that you stand at the edge of this abyss, you must decide what kind of man you will become. The Fairfax family's sinister tale is not just a story of corruption and darkness. It is a warning and a call to arms. They built their empire on secrecy, manipulation, and the destruction of innocence. But you, armed with this forbidden knowledge, have the power to dismantle that legacy. This is no longer about fear or helplessness. It is about reclaiming control over your own mind, your life, and ultimately, the future. Your journey from darkness into light is the path few dare to take. It demands courage, relentless curiosity, and an unyielding commitment to truth. There will be moments when the weight of this knowledge threatens to crush you, when doubt and isolation tempt you to turn back. But remember, every revelation is a step toward freedom. Every truth uncovered weakens the chains forged by the elite. As you walk this path, you become more than a witness. You become a guardian, one who protects others from deception, who exposes lies, and who refuses to be silent. This transformation is your legacy. Your resistance will ripple beyond what you can see, inspiring others to awaken and stand. So, I ask you now, repeat these words in the comments below. I am awake. I am free. Say it twice, aloud or in your mind. Lock in your identity as a seeker, a warrior, a man who refuses to be controlled. Because once you say it, once you claim this power, there is no turning back. You have stepped into the light, and the world will never look the same again. Welcome to the truth. Welcome to your awakening.